we have talked a little on the channel about the documentation, and I think you, Loris, and Eric had some good input with some links to some videos and just general ideas about what good documentation entails. I've tried to work on the handbook for quite some time, but I find it kind of difficult to find the right balance between being a guide, being reference, being tutorials, and all that. And that might be because it shouldn't be everything. Like, we should definitely have clear-cut separation between the different types of documentation. I would like your input on that, I guess. And also, I would like input on, I kind of started a new process for documenting myself in the last few days. And that's, I've discovered that my main challenge with doing this kind of documentation is that you need to categorize things into, like, when you create, it's almost like writing a book or a chapter or something. You do need to present things in a certain order and make sure to not include advanced topics before you covered the related stuff and yada yada yada. And my problem is that I find it really hard to do that kind of thing, especially because I think some parts belong in multiple places and multiple categories, sort of, and then I just can't manage. I get paralyzed and I just can't manage to find a decent order and a decent structure for the documentation. So we have the handbook here, like this is running locally, but it's the same, practically the same handbook that we have on V2. I started a new one, just a new outline that was supposed to have the same concepts, but just structuring it a little differently. And again, I ran into the same problems, like, oh, where should methods go? Should they go in functions or classes or both, or all of that? So instead, I started adding reference, which is it's not going to be shown in the sidebar in this way or anything. It's essentially just me adding a single document for every kind of concept that I think needs to be explained in Imba. And then I won't care at all about the structure or like the order. So you can go straight to CSS aliases. I write something there. CSS colors, you can go to whatever for in. None of them will like think that you have any previous knowledge about other concepts. But they're all kind of a long list of documents. It's almost like having a huge stack of you deal with this, Alexander, like memory cards, like a huge stack of single page articles covering various topics.
Yeah, flashcards, right?
Yeah, so flashcards.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, do you think it will be okay if I do the like import? Let's go to the import reference. Right now, it's basically just a bunch of examples that I wrote, showing import and export. And if I add these kinds of documentations for all the concepts I can think of, could you guys or someone else try to like pull out some of that knowledge into more structured and newbie friendly guide, sort of?
Yeah, yes, I think we can.
Yes. This is an excellent approach. I love it.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah, because it's so much easier for me, like taking a simple concept like bang invocation, the fact that you can actually invoke a function by just adding an exclamation mark after. I have no idea where to naturally, smoothly put that into the handbook, but I can easily know that, yeah, that's a concept that's worth knowing about Imba. So I can just type out a reference page for it, and then
a question for you, Sindre. Is it possible to have something like a tooltip or a hovering tooltip within the guides? So when I hover with the mouse over a certain item, I would have a possibility of directly going to the reference part, explaining a little bit more in depth a certain topic.
Yeah, so that was actually the idea, and that's cool that you mentioned this as well. I think if we really fill out the reference topics, then we can do cool things like every keyword you hover over in any example could take you to the reference page for that statement or that keyword. Any CSS modifier could take you to that part, etc. And even if you're browsing the documentation in like a wide screen, we could even do it like 2 columns where you could always see the reference part in the right hand column. So whatever reference thing you click on in the documentation, you can get the related reference document right up there on the right.
Is there a way of automatizing that? So kind of something that would just scan a particular page of a guide and detect all the features that you reference in there?
Yeah, for the code, it's easy. Like that will be definitely easy. For the rest, we probably might need some kind of syntax where you can just add a sloppy sort of reference, like add square brackets around the word, and then it will just link to the closest matching reference thing or something. But yeah, that can definitely be done.
Yeah. That would make the life very easy for those people that would focus on the guide or on the tutorial or on the quick start. What we are missing, or well, whoever jumps up to help in the documentation, is the link to the actual reference, having everything documented in the reference.
Yeah.
But this reference might disappear, right? So this reference is not necessarily going to be there at the end. But like, I like the reference with regards to, if you think about who's writing the guides in idiomatic Imba, what I like with this reference part is you're producing the code. We have one taste, or we have one specific style, and it's very obvious this is idiomatic Imba versus everyone writes random stuff, and then who knows what kind of style we have in there. So I think this listing all of the, if you don't list it out in the reference here, it doesn't exist. So if you could like get everything that exists in Imba in there, so there's like everything, absolutely everything. Like the CSS stuff you've added is really like extensive, at least from what I see from here. But like everything in the language, which is user facing on the front end.
Yeah, please set up an issue somewhere, or a different way where we can just add those things that we think are not yet mentioned in the reference, so that we can keep track.
Yeah, we should do that. We can just add issues now to the InBio repository, I guess, and add a specific tag for it, a specific label.
Yeah, or just have one single issue that just collects all the undocumented stuff, and you can just cross out the things that have been done.
Yeah, and it's all being done to various degrees. Like I might end up like a wait here is not done at all. I've just added 2 tiny code example blocks. So I definitely need to just type out the things I can, and then you can give feedback on what parts are really lacking and what parts are like okay-ish, so I can move on with other missing parts of the reference. And then in the end, when we actually launch this officially, I obviously think we need all of these reference pages need some polish sprinkle as well. And there I might need some help with the writing and stuff, but.
Just another question, is there a possibility afterwards to show or hide a particular section? For example, if we decide to include some reference to MDN and afterwards it turns out that it's a bad idea, we can just hide that away from the render documentation? You
mean still keep it in the documentation but hide it from the render documentation, or?
Yes, for example.
Yeah, obviously. Like the markdowns, the markdown extensions are getting kind of pretty extensive, and we can add all sorts of things. So you can tag any section with the various labels, and then you can use them to hide or change the types of sections, and we can do those things. I also added, just while working on the import stuff, I also added support for, within the markdown format, actually adding multi-file projects. And it's not really done just yet, like finished, but I also added support for kind of pretty nice, clean output of the console stuff, if you have examples that don't have any tags or previews.
Excellent.
Yeah. Do Do you have any input, Alexander?
So I'm just thinking, before I go into that, I was wondering, Alp, do you have anything you would like to highlight? Like, you've been learning Imba. You're probably the one who has the least experience with Imba among us here.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I would love to hear your thoughts, and we're hoping to recruit more young people and people who have never used Imba in the future. So what do you think?
Okay, so now I just can't say much things about what you're talking about now, like creating references and then adding them to a handbook. But I can say that that the current version of Imba documentation is not really clear, in my opinion. I just can't look at that and understand everything. Most of the time, I check Alexander's code to understand what I have to do or try myself something. But yeah.
That's
so sorry, Sindre, to interrupt you, but like, if we go back to two things, like if you go to the overview, like, I think what you've made looks aesthetically pleasing. It looks nice, feels good. But the problem with this literal stuff, like if you see this green block, I don't know what it's called in the implementation, but like, it's too tight, it's too concise. You see this basic syntax and then the literals, the rounded rect essentially. We need something between the rounded rect and the code, right? We need something that holds your hand just a little bit. You're going to spend most of the time reading code, but if you scroll a little bit further down, just a little bit.
So that depends on
just a
if you
bit.
talk.
If you look at the elements, right?
So
I think we should, yes, code comments are good, but we need to get, like, it's too subtle. You can't really, like, when I look at this, elements are first-class citizen. That text is like almost invisible to me, like when I read this. So we need to pull the comments out or provide better summaries before the code presentation, because yes, it looks really nice with this rounded rect and then the dark shade, but it's like I can see how we're losing people. Like, it's just aesthetically pleasing, but it's not useful, in my opinion.
But I think that's mostly about just adding those comments.
Yeah.
So that's just, that's the same as just, okay, so
wait.
There's literally no documentation on the operators, and that's just because I've only added the code so far. Like, obviously we need to add some text as well.
Yeah,
but I do think
to add some text
for simple summaries like this kind of thing. I actually think that you can add a line or two below, but from the handbook approach, I'm not talking about the tutorial. Like, when you're talking about more tutorial kind of thing, then you obviously need to do this kind of thing that Eric has started, where you actually hold people's hands. But I do think that for people who are used to some programming language and just want to get like a quick glance of how Imba looks and how it works, I do think it's very useful with the code examples, like more so than a lot of text. I remember, like, the CoffeeScript, I'm not sure how the documentation is right now, but I remember that I actually found that documentation pretty good, mostly because there were a bunch of examples, and then you could see the compiled output as well. But yeah,
we're talking about the same thing. And if you look closer at the CoffeeScript example, they have text before and after.
But it's like writing that text is what I need help to do.
So, I see. So another thing, like with regards to, if you go to the loops part, me and Alp were trying to record stuff earlier, right before this meeting. So we're still working out details. We had some mic issues. Hopefully we're going to get that resolved. If you have some input on that, because you did some dialogues about Imba with, I don't remember his name. There was one guy.
But the Alteo. But that was kind of like a really clumsy setup, where I essentially had him on speaker loud enough for it to be picked up by my microphone.
Oh, that's not what we want to do. We want to use audio devices. So
I struggled for a long time trying to do that, and I just couldn't get it to work.
we're going to try and see. Hopefully we'll get it to work. But during one of the apps we were building, if you go all the way down, I think in this section, we were having some issues with the inclusive range. I don't know where it is. Like,
okay,
maybe it's in the next. Think it's here. Maybe it's in the next tab. Foreign.
Yeah, in the foreign. Yeah.
So the thing was that I just didn't have any spaces. So I was trying to figure out what the for num in, and I think that's like, this is just an example to show the potential bigger issue. I don't know if it is a bigger issue. So like, this was what I was thinking with regards to ambiguity in the language. So here now you can't use spaces, but
you have to use spaces, you mean?
Yeah, the other way. Yeah, you have to use spaces.
Yeah.
So.
And I agree. So there are many things like this, and the reason for this is that we introduced the predicate identifier syntax, and then we had to use we chose to use double dots for knowledge access operator, like a safe access, where it checks if the left side exists before it tries to access the right side. So then, since we did that, I just added the requirement of having spaces around the ranges, but it's not really documented. So either we need to come up with a different kind of syntax for ranges, or we just need to document it really well and also identify these problems in the highlighter in your tooling.
Just a question, can your parser not identify those two and separate those two cases?
There are some ambiguous cases because you can use definitely when you use actual integer, like actual literal numbers for each part of the range, then surely. But if you don't, if you use a dynamic, like a reference to a variable or something, then it's much harder because you can't really know what you're trying to do. Like there isn't a difference between if I just if I do to, like from to, it's not really easy to understand if that's the same as from to with that kind of knowledge accessor.
Okay.
Yeah.
Second question, since I'm just interrupting, is there a particular reason why we have three different for loops, for in, for off, and for on off?
So there are some historical reasons for it.
Yes, historically I can understand, but if we are redesigning a language from scratch, I'm just wondering if it's not always the same use case. I mean, in one case we use iterators, in the other we use next, in the other we use God knows arrays or whatever.
It's a good question. Like one reason for still allowing the native for in loops is that they are still in many cases much more performant than using iterators. I'm not sure if that's a really valid use case, but it's at least it's true. So now there's three. So for own, it's a good question. It's still kind of messy to do it. Even doing it with iterators is pretty verbose right now, and I still think it is something I at least do quite a lot in various places in my code bases. But I would like to be able to remove some of the complexity there. I definitely see it, like having three ways to loop through an array seems
I do understand. I do understand the technical reason for it, but if you look at it from the end user that first comes to the language from a completely different language, and he sees 3 for loops which basically allow him to do one and the same thing, it's kind of confusing a bit.
Yeah, I agree. It's a good question. Like, I think because this started just as a tiny improvement and a few tiny changes from Imba 1, but now that we are actually essentially releasing it as a new language, it makes sense to reconsider some of those things as well. Yeah.
Well, I would just open my issue about it. Feel free to close it again.
Yeah, no, but it's interesting. It'll but I'll be thinking more about it.
All of these different types have a use case, right? So it's not like
except from a performance perspective, you could say that 4 in and 4 off essentially covers exactly the same use case.
Yeah, I see. So it would, yeah.
But
This
4
could be a
on-off
good
is,
time. This could be a good time to remove stuff.
Yeah. Could. But I guess it could be a good time, but it's at the same time, it's not critical in the sense that it will be easy to deprecate one or the other later, because they are almost essentially like interoperable. And language like CoffeeScript has a few. They also have quite a few different ways to loop through things, and I don't think that's the reason CoffeeScript is now going like getting fewer users. But yeah.
So what I'm thinking to do next was to do the install docs. I haven't been sure like how deep should we go. It just says to do. I've started working on it locally. I was talking with Alp about it, like what makes sense there, like how much should we show? It's possible to make YouTube videos, for example, where we show you how you install Imba and then just do a short tutorial.
I think it should be quite simple. Like this is the whole installation page for CoffeeScript.
So do you think something like that is enough, or should we try to make it better?
I think it's much better than nothing. Okay. And since people are trying to start out with version 2 already, I think we should just get a basic version up as soon as possible. And it's important. I think it's more important to spend effort improving the Imba template, like making that understandable and clean and simple, and because as long as people get interested in the language by seeing the syntax, seeing how it works, and like reading blurbs about the benefits of it, I think most people will manage to discover some things for themselves. Like they don't want to watch a long YouTube video about installing it. That just means our installation process is way too complex, because it should be just npm install Imba and npm start snowpack or whatever, and then boom, you should be up and running.
I want to add something here. For the newest beginners that don't have any coding experience, and we have to attract newcomers in order to spread Imba. So when someone with no coding experience comes to Imba's website, he will see a complicated installation guide with lines of code. So I think I agree with Alexander, and I think we have to try to make it better for the newcomers. We have to make it more understandable for the beginners.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Alp, would you be interested in recording a video on how to install it on Windows? I can make the changes Sindre has. Like I've already started on writing the install page, so I have something locally. But I wanted to figure out what is the scope of the installation guide before pushing it out on GitHub. So if you could make a video on how to do it on Windows, maybe I could do one on Mac, and then we basically have the major OSs covered.
Yeah, we could try that. I actually prefer you go first, and I can look at your video and make something similar. Yeah.
So I think since you talk about that, Alexander, I think when we mentioned scope and what the scope for this and that should be, I think we should think that we should try to just fill out sections as good as possible to make sure they're at least something there for the people who are really interested and have some knowledge from before, and then later start to truly get it to a level where even complete newcomers can come to Imba as their first language and really learn it efficiently. Because otherwise it will take so much time to get it out.
Yeah, but if it's going to be really great at the end, then maybe it's good that it does take a while to get out.
Yeah, but I don't think it's good to wait until everything is good enough to teach even the people who aren't even into programming at all. So I do think that's the end goal, definitely. But it's such a shame. I started using CoffeeScript 8 years ago or something, and that was because I read about it on on Hacker News when it was still like pretty buggy. It had enough documentation, enough installation stuff that I could start playing around with it, and I got interested. And that actually eventually like turned into this iteration of Imba. So getting people, there are a lot of people out there who are using Ruby or using Python, or even are just have been using React for many years, that we would definitely like to get in front of, because if they get interested, they might spend tons of time helping out to improve Imba as well.
Yeah.
What we can do to attract the newcomers is to take some ready-made example code. I'm thinking of the GitHub repository of this TAW, whatever his name is. He's impressive. He wrote 10,000 examples. I think most of them are still Imba version 1. Maybe we could ask his permission to take over a number of those examples and have somebody dedicated to rewrite them in Imba 2. That can be a very nice playground, especially to tease newcomers into a language, to tell them, look, you just need a handful of lines, 20 lines, and you get this output.
Yeah, and we are, since we created Scrimba, so we are obviously in the relatively short term going to have a world-class editing right in the site, like where you can preview and muck around with things, see the output. We can embed Scrimba videos. I think there are so many ways we can eventually make it really great for newcomers, but I just don't see I don't think it's the right to wait until we have all.
We don't agree on this. That's just the truth. I think like this is what's required. Like if we're gonna make Imba more popular than it has been before. But do
you have any idea like how was the Vue initially? How was the Vue 2 guide? How was the first React website when it got out? Like how was all of these things? We need to so like we've got Euloris. He created the Snowpack plugin. He only started actively in the community a few weeks ago. So how would we get him or hundreds of others like him if we didn't put ourselves somewhat out there?
Well, I can tell you right now what motivates me.
Yeah.
Well, just please make a big point in how is this different from JavaScript. I hate JavaScript. JavaScript has so many stupidities in it that we cannot get rid of because of browser compatibility, because of node compatibility, and so many other things. People that come from Ruby or Python, they really feel an allergy when they have to start coding in JavaScript because there are so many hidden traps that break you, that you spend so much more time in actually being efficient in JavaScript because you have to continuously look up. I had to look up how to write a stupid for loop because I was annoyed with the things that you inherit from prototypes or from God knows where other things extremely complex for a beginner, for a newbie that is just starting with JavaScript. And from that sense, I saw that Imba gives me this abstract layer that just hides away all the bullshit of the JavaScript language and gives me something clean and native, something that I can assimilate one-to-one with Ruby or Python or some other decent language.
Exactly. And
that is a selling point, guys. That is a selling point. Please use it.
Yeah, we know that. But also like people like you are definitely being like, you are in the audience. Like if your target audience is beginners, we're not excluding these kinds of people, these developers. I think actually on the contrary, if we focus on the beginner and try to really improve in that direction, like we are making it even more approachable for these kinds of developers, because think about it, there's so much stuff that's unfamiliar for a Python or Ruby developer when they come to this JavaScript ecosystem.
But Alexander, just to make things clear, like, yes, eventually we both agree it's perfect. Like Eric is passionate about this as well. It's a perfect language for beginners, and we definitely should cater to them eventually. But right now, the truth is that the main development of the language and the core knowledge about the language exists in one guy's head, and that's me, and that's a big problem. And so if we work for, or if I essentially work for another half year on the language, on fixing all the rough edges and improving the reference documentation enough that you guys can create even better documentation for beginners and all of that, then I've essentially probably spent half a year that could have been spent along with other really good technical people like you, Loris, who contributed the snowpack thing. Like if we try to perfect this for beginners now, we lose a ton of time that could be spent attracting people who are really skilled, not necessarily in JavaScript, but in Ruby or Python, or people who are technical, people who are really passionate already about things like this, that can contribute both to the documentation and to the language itself. So I think it's kind of foolish to think that we should start the whole ecosystem just by catering to beginners, even though that will also let more experienced people use it.
There is another point that we have not yet mentioned, and that is particularly interesting for beginners. Beginners, they need some kind of babysitting as well, and that is quite a lot of effort and a lot of time spent by knowledgeable people like you, Alexander, or you, Sindre. So be very careful. Ideally, you first have a critical mass of halfway knowledgeable people about the language, because they are taking off the work of babysitting the newcomers, and we are not yet there.
Yeah, it's true.
So look at the Snowpack plugin. I do agree there were a number of stupid bugs in there at the very beginning, well, still now, but a lot of people, they were just coming to me and saying, hey, how do I get this up and running? Because I don't know. And then I checked out their code, and they really had silly mistakes. I mean, semicolons forgetting or forgetting to close the brackets, or including some other plugins that had nothing to see. And my first reaction was, hey, first you do a little bit your job before I start looking at your code, because you're just wasting my time. But I am not allowed to have that kind of reaction. So I prefer, listen, just give me time for me to focus. I wanted to have the Vite plugin finished this weekend. I didn't manage. Because, well, I'm spending time with other things as well. So yeah, it's a difficult balance to strike there.
Yeah.
Alexander, I fully agree with you. We really need to focus on the beginners. I'm just wondering at what moment in time we can do that.
Yeah, I agree too.
Yeah, so we have two different audiences where, like, we have conflicting masters. If you remember the talk I sent on Discord, Eloris. So I want to cater to the beginners, and I get what you're saying, Sindre. So I've been pushing for this direction several times, and sometimes I've given up on it and then tried again. So
but cater to beginners, like, what do you mean? Like, what could I possibly do differently right now to cater to beginners than to actually make things work and finishing it up and write enough documentation for people to even know about the features in the language?
We could delay going like the release schedule until we get this documentation part right. So if it does take until Christmas or January or whatever.
Yeah, but what does that entail? Like, I agree that we're not going to. I haven't made that clear, but I agree that we shouldn't do a public big launch, like trying to get on top of Hacker News until the documentation is good. And with good, I don't mean like world class, but I mean really good for a language like this. Like, as long as it's better than the CoffeeScript documentation, I'm perfectly comfortable with pushing out, like, hey, Imba version 2 is in beta. It's a really cool program language. You should see it. I don't think that pushing that part will lose a lot of beginners that check out the language and think, hey, I don't understand everything here, and then never come back. I don't think that's a big problem. I think the main reason I started picking up CoffeeScript was not that I read the first article about it. It was that I saw a few articles pop up now and then eventually I thought, like, hey, I've seen CoffeeScript mentioned many times now. I got to check it out. And
so I don't want to keep pushing like my views on stuff. So like, have you gotten to talk with Eric and hear what he thinks like I haven't paid attention to all of the messages that were written by you, Loris and Eric, but what's the expectation from your side? What's Eric working on? Like, I'm going to continue going from the installation and then working my way downwards, and then try to either address stuff or create issues when I see stuff. So what's your expectations, Indre?
I saw Eric's post on the docs section, and I like that very much. So we can just write a skeleton, or you, Alexander, if you have a particular setup in mind, you can write a skeleton, and we can identify those parts that should be filled out, and then identify who would be doing that. Eric was writing about quick start, tutorial, how-to guides, API, and references, concepts, resources.
So is that in Discord, or where is that?
That is in Discord, in the docs channel, the same channel where you have published the YouTube video, which, by the way, I found absolutely amazing and excellent. And that guy, this Igor Starikov, he also suggests 4 main entry points into the documentation. So the tutorial, the quick start, the reference, and eventually also the troubleshooting section. So Alexander, if you have the time, you can write a skeleton and identify which part we already have information, which part we have no information, and which would be relevant for beginners. So then we have a more concrete way of moving forward.
Yeah, I see. So like, I definitely have to get through the documentation. I've only been into parts of it. I haven't gotten through everything. So I can go through everything, hopefully soon. So it's just taking time to get through stuff.
So then you can imagine how much time it takes to write it as well.
Yeah, I don't think that we have a different or opposing view, Alexander or Sindre. I think we can kind of agree on everything, but for that we need a skeleton and identify which part we have to fill out. And for you, Sindre, I would really love you to focus your efforts, documentation efforts, on writing, referencing. So things that are currently not yet documented and that have to be documented somewhere. And don't really focus too much where it has to go, or if that doesn't make sense, or if a newcomer would have a hard time in understanding the concept of things like that. I think for that, you can hire other people that help you out.
Yeah. I definitely agree, and that's the main thing I figured out, that the reason it's taking long for me with the handbook is exactly that I need to figure out the order and the outline and trying to do it in a user friendly way, which is hard. But yeah, again, I would like to just highlight what you, Laura, said. I agree that I don't think we have conflicting ideas even. But I've tried to say it a bunch of times, Alexander, that for me, like, I don't have time. It doesn't make sense for me at all to now start spending tons of time myself writing documentation from the viewpoint of a complete beginner, because there's so much other things that are still not yet working at all. And I really do think that like any other kind of product, like the whole crossing the chasm kind of thing, you do need to first get the evangelist on board. Like, you first need to get the people like you. Like, there's a reason we're sitting here talking now instead of me still sitting in a basement trying to perfect this for beginners. Like, you do need to cater to the enthusiasts first, who are already skilled and can contribute, and then you can eventually gradually start catering to other groups, I think.
Well, it's called the critical mass.
Yeah.
It can be as small as you want. I mean, it can just be a handful of people, but you need people around you that help you out, that have a certain degree of knowledge, so that they can deal with incoming issues, support requests, or pull requests, or God knows.
Yeah.
So with regards to a timeline, like one thing that's like a challenge for me is like I have to work on Scrimba stuff, right? You know that too, Sindre. You also have the same challenge. So like if we could at least get enough time to like one thing that stresses me out is like not knowing like feeling like you have too little time. And so if we like have like a timeline in mind, like with regards to the good enough documentation, is it like, are we speaking, like, do we have like until September, or do we have until October?
We have until it works, obviously. We have until I think the documentation is good enough, and right now it's far from good enough. So if it ends up being Christmas, then it ends up being Christmas. But I just wanted to like try to push forward and say that we should be able to pull together some sort of documentation that is good enough to get these first enthusiasts or evangelists on board to grow the core community and the core team, not too far in the future.
For that, I would even include a small pop-up or a link or something on the main Imba website pointing to the version 2 with a strong disclaimer, like this is breaking stuff, or this is avant-garde, or however you want to call it. This is the best of the best, but be careful, you're on your own. Something like that. So that whoever arrives at Imba does not start reading Imba version 1 documentation, because that would really be a waste for him, and he would feel pretty disappointed if after 1 week time he realizes that he's just reading outdated stuff. Yeah,
and that's a good point. I think that's actually I think that should happen quite much sooner, because I think the documentation on Imba 1 isn't good anyways, and I do think that we really don't want people to start investing time in Imba 1 now. It doesn't make any sense. And it will push us to actually expose Imba 2, the Imba 2 website as the main website, even with the disclaimer on top and a link to Imba 1. I think we should even go the other way. And it will also push us to more quickly fix the roughest edges and improve the documentation.
So like, I've set up the V1 domain. That one is working and everything. I just need to set up the GitHub Actions, and then if we have a V1 branch now, I think. So that one is we need to set up the GitHub Action stuff.
Yeah.
So what if we do it this way, just like a rough plan? Like if I go through, continue with what I've been doing, which is go from overview, and I'm currently at installation. I'll try to get through everything, and then maybe we could change the site even next week. So V2 is going to be the front page, basically. And like, there's no point in learning V1 now. Like, you're not getting any benefit other than, you're not really getting any benefit.
No, I agree.
So should we do that? Or I could ask you again next week.
Yeah, I think we should make sure it's like, right now there's so many things that are just even missing. So I don't even remember like totally where, but I do think we could essentially do it pretty quickly.
Nice.
Yeah. Okay. So do we have sort of a plan, or at least for me, I'm going to continue with the reference parts, and you, Loris, and you others can post issues requesting more documentation on various concepts. And I really need help. I will talk to Eric as well, but I really need help on the grander outline, both of the handbook, but also for more the tutorial kind of thing. But I also think that we should, instead of focusing too much on written tutorials, like long form tutorials about creating apps, I definitely think we should use Scrimba for that.
Exactly, yeah. For that, Scrimba is perfect.
Yeah.
Do we have already some sample Scrimba screencast? I mean, even just 1 minute or something like that, so to have a rough idea how that would be integrated into the documentation?
Yeah, we don't have any in the documentation now, but we could. You've probably seen it, but Alexander and I recorded some what did we call them?
Imba change logs. Let me post that for you in the link.
Yeah. So
I have seen that. That was from March, I think.
Yeah.
It's been a while.
So Alexander added support for the latest alpha, or the almost latest alpha, to Scrimba yesterday or something. and we'll add better syntax highlighting and some error reporting and stuff soon as well. So I think when we get there, I definitely do think that we can start recording more stuff again, and I'll probably record some of the like showing what has changed and stuff like that, and then we can start gradually like seeing how it will work, embedding it into the documentation.
Yeah, and also also we can change the embeds. Like the defaults, the current Scrimba embeds look a certain way. If we need them to look differently for our docs, then we can definitely create a new endpoint or something on Scrimba to render them much nicer. So, and also it would be nice to have a slim version, something that doesn't pull in all the Scrimba dependencies and so on.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I was just wondering for us, I mean, I have zero experience with Scrimba, if you can just make a mock-up with one screencast or something like that, so we have an idea how that would be integrated into the documentation. And the second thing I just want to say is careful with videos. Very long videos, they scare people away. So I have a hard time in watching a long video a second time, even though I missed some contents of it. So I think it would be nice to have a rule of thumb, for example, not to make a single screencast embedded into the documentation longer than, let's say, 3 minutes or 5 minutes. So people know already what to expect when they click on the play button.
Yeah. So this is from the Imba 1 page. This is too long, but at the same time, I think it probably, if it was cut down to 3 minutes, I think it would be much more helpful for a lot of people than
to be honest, like I don't quite agree there. It really depends on how we're using them. Like if you look at most of Scrimba courses, I've watched many, and you have the short scrims and screencasts, but like it depends on what you're doing. If you're building a big application and demonstrating how you would use Imba in like a big app, then it's totally fine if it's 10, 15, 20 minutes long. It depends on what's being displayed in the
Yes, that is correct. It's just if you go to the documentation, it's either to get to learn a language for the first time, or you go back to the documentation because there was a particular topic that you're interested in and that you would like to have a little bit more information about it. So it was more for that second part where I'm wondering about the length of videos.
Shorter ones are in general better.
Yeah, and just for I don't remember if I have them now, but let's see. We could even, for small examples like this thing here, we can add some text as well, but you could easily create a 2-minute screencast about just about this block here that explains a ton of things to people. Like if you can just click play here and you get a small walkthrough about the different concepts and why we write this and why we write that and how it works. I think that's really useful for people. And it's not, it hasn't been done in any sort of documentation before because they don't have that kind of technology. So if we really integrate Scrimba well, then...
Actually, the Vue docs have Scrimba casts linking back to us. So they're kind of doing it.
Yeah, but that's just links to a wholly different site. But yeah, it's a start.
Nice. So I feel like I got something out of this with regards to the next steps. It would be good to get through all of the documentation. So what are you going to do as the next thing, Loris? What do you want to contribute with in the docs?
In the docs, what I will contribute is identify those parts that are missing, at least for me, for me gathering knowledge or things like that. I will not dedicate too much time on docs. What I would like to do is to work on a proposal coming from you, Alexander. So if you know how to split up the different categories of documentations, I mean, base yourself on that video that you shared with us. That's excellent. These 4 different entry points, then we can work on that. I mean, making a little bit more exhaustive table of contents. I mean, wishful table of contents, so that we know in which direction we should be heading.
Yeah.
Alexander, can you do that? I would love to work on it.
Yeah, so I can't promise you anything, to be honest. Like I have some priorities I have to get through this week, but like I'm gonna go through the docs, the current ones, and then create an outline based like outlining that I think this is a better way as an opinion. And I think that would be an answer to what you're asking about, if I think correctly.
So having spent weeks and weeks trying to create and shuffle around the outline, I think it would be a good exercise for you to actually create an outline kind of from scratch, like what you think should be gone through and in what order.
So you mean like one that doesn't take into account the current state of the documentation, but one that's totally from the beginning?
Because the state of the documentation now is more and more like just various bits and pieces of information describing various aspects, and then we can later, especially when I pull that out into the different reference docs, then we will later pull that into an outline that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah,
I understand what you're saying. So I can propose an outline, Ulores, but what I'm worried about, if I propose an outline, is it a bar that's too high for us to reach? So
I think at least
what we need is a roadmap or a goal. It's like the famous carrot that you have hanging in front of your nose. It's needing a direction where to go to. We are not going to change anything right now. Especially, I'm mostly worried about Sindre, that he keeps focusing on completing the documentation and the reference part. So I don't want, Sindre, you to deviate from that path. But in parallel, you, Alexander, and Eric, especially Eric as well, and me as well, we can start thinking about what kind of information and on what level of depth we include information in the tutorial, in the guide, in the how-to, in the troubleshooting, and yeah, distinguishing a little bit and laying out some kind of boundaries as well, and also deciding on the prosa style. So how much code, how much verbose text, how many examples, how to interlink everything, and how to spread it over pages, or keeping everything in one single page, those kind of decisions. I think that is something that we can do without so much input from Sindre.
Yeah, but yeah, I agree. The only thing I don't like is the back and forth. But yeah, let's do that. We should also try to schedule a new meeting on talking about the documentation state again. Or actually, we have a bi-weekly meeting next week, right? So Sindre, is Monday okay for you? The upcoming Monday? Do you have time then?
I think so. I don't know completely now, but I do think so.
Cool. Let's. I will just add a small time slot for the documentation status. So let us know if something changes. Elores, I think that's great feedback. Alp, what are you going to do with regards to documentation?
Identifying the missing parts, opening up an issue about it.
Yeah. I think he asked the
Alp, let's hear.
He asked me. I think I'm the least experienced one here, so I can't just identify the needs and contribute that, but I can give my impression on the things you create. As a beginner, I can say what a beginner in Imba, I can say what is needed for me. Because I'm not an experienced Imba coder, so I can ask you some things that can be included in the documentation. So feel free to ask me if something you write is understandable or enough.
Yeah.
Sounds good. So I have to go for a 7-kilometer run soon and stairs workout. So if there's nothing else, I think we should wrap up. Is there anything else?
Not for me, at least.
Not from my side.
Good. Let's wrap up. Thanks for taking the time, Sindre. And
yeah, thanks for taking the time, all of you.
Thanks.
Cool.
Thank you very much.